All right, so we have an esteemed API developer from Google, followed by the man who wrote a book called Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus. So we like to mix things up here a little bit. Up next, we have Douglas Rushkoff, an amazing writer, and he's really looking at the effects of technological change and how unequal the distribution of the benefits of technological change can sometimes be. How a generation of companies like Uber, Airbnb, and others have come up, and yet the benefits of those, while they appear to be disruptive in a creative way, often end up being destructive to laborers, to society at large, and hopefully he'll give you something to think about. Douglas?
Thanks. Oh my God, this thing's heavy. Gosh, I was listening to a lot of the stuff you guys were talking about, and I have so many comments and things, and I would love to, we should have a meeting. I mean, open source inside a company to open source is like Prozac to LSD. It's that radically different. Yeah, it's good to be open in your company, but if you open it up, I'll talk about that a little bit later. If you actually open up, what does that say about the company to the world? What it says, if you open up your current innovation process, it means that you are so confident that you house the greatest expertise in the world that even sharing this with everyone and having them contribute doesn't pose a competitive advantage to you. I mean, it's such a, I mean, if you really don't feel it's real, if you don't feel you have that expertise in-house, then maybe you do want to shield it, but open, go. And I also got a little, as a consumer even, a little off-put by the conversation about AI and using AI and AI receptionists, because I remember the 1970s calling up the first robo receptionists and having to go through all the menus and how much more time it took me to deal with a robot receptionist than a real one. And I realized what was really happening here, and this is really the core of my argument, is that these companies were using a digital technology but to solve an industrial age problem, which is how do we externalize the cost of our receptionists to all the people who call us rather than pay it ourselves. Because for everyone who calls the company, it takes more time, but for the company, they save money, so it creates an arms race. Then everyone has to have a robo-receptionist so that everyone's cost gets externalized to everybody else, and it ends up more expensive for everyone, and the only one that makes money on that is the company that's making the robotic answers. Which is a very specific example of a very general thing that I want to talk about, which is that we are currently deploying digital technology in a way that is not consonant with a 21st century digital economy. And the ones who should understand that the most are the banking industry. I mean, Google can be forgiven for not understanding that. And it's interesting because they have so many open APIs and things, and there's so much going on at the same time that in San Francisco, the effect on the real world where they operate is so devastating that people are actually throwing rocks at the Google bus, that they perceive of the employees as this sort of alien invasion. So that because so many Google employees live in San Francisco, the rents have gone up, and then they use these buses to transport the employees back and forth, and if you live within walking distance of a bus stop, your rent is even 20 or 30% higher than it is for everybody else. So the people in San Francisco started to feel like this was, what was that Twilight Zone episode, To Serve Man? Like these sort of alien entities using their public bus stops and bringing them back and forth. So what was happening, though, and this is why it was so poignant for so many of us, Google was the ultimate good guy success story. Two kids in their Stanford dorm room come up with this algorithm that's going to take down the big bad corporation. That was Yahoo, which at the time we hated because Yahoo was organizing the web's information from the top down, creating all these categories. And here Google basically used a peoples-based algorithm of our peer-to-peer connections and what are we linking to do a bottom-up organization of the web. And these two little guys became this giant corporation that's not even Google anymore. Google is now Alphabet. Alphabet Alphabet is a holding company, which means Google makes its money not by developing technology, but by buying and selling other technology companies. It's like Merck is to pharmaceuticals or any other holding company. It's the Jack Welch GE model of business, where he realized we make less money making and selling a washing machine than we do lending money to someone to buy a washing machine. So let's sell off our productive assets, like making of appliances, and instead go into finance. And that was great for them until around 2007 when finance crashed. Because finance is actually something that requires expertise, which I think you guys should be happy about. Real finance requires expertise. This growth-based 13th century economic model does not require expertise. All that requires is a monopoly. And that's the problem. We're using digital technology to emphasize an old operating system. You know, when the net first came around in the late 80s, early 90s, people like me thought this is going to be a major transformation of our society. Now we're going to have peer-to-peer lateral transactions between people, or more simply, we're going to get to work at home in our underwear, in our own time, trading stuff on Etsy and Burning Man and having fun and being slackers and reading philosophy. Right? And it did sound good. And if you were around then, you'd read about that in magazines like Boing Boing and Mondo 2000, describing this new reality. Then along came Wired magazine and said, no, 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 the net is about something else entirely. Remember the 1987 biotech boom and bust? Well, there was one, and the stock market crashed, and people thought the NASDAQ stock exchange was done. Wired said, don't worry, now because of the net, we're going to have new surface area on the marketplace. Even though we reached our limits of colonial expansion, now we can mine human attention. And they started talking about the attention economy that we live in, and the new unit of measurement was going to be eyeball hours. So we created a very sticky web, and we took an internet that could have created more time and allowed people to create more value between each other, and we turned the web into a way to extract value from people in terms of their time. And we ended up with digital companies basically serving as the come hither for financial investment, regardless of the value they may create or not create for people. Right? The object of a digital company, maybe when you're in the dorm room, you might think, oh, here's a great app that's going to let people call taxis more easily than they can by hailing them in the streets. Then you take your VC, and then you pivot to become what? A platform monopoly that's going to put all taxis out of business, not because we care about driving at all, but because we want to become a logistics company or something else. I mean, do you think Amazon went into the book business because they care about readers? No, they went into it because they could establish a monopoly and then leverage that monopoly to take over other businesses. Because the only mandate they really have is a 13th century printing press era central currency-driven drive for growth. You have to grow, right? If you don't grow, you die. So Twitter, poor little Twitter. Twitter, an app, and if you're not familiar, 140-character messaging app, it's really a clever little app. Clever little app. It makes $2 billion a year in revenue. But that, as we all know, is considered an abject failure by Wall Street because Evan, who's a friend of mine, Evan took too much money. Evan and Jack, they took too much VC, and now the company is going to be killed. Just watch. You're going to watch the quality of what Twitter is, that great little cheap, transparent, easy app. Watch it die as it tries to figure out a way to become $100 billion. They have to return 100x, 1000x return to investors who came in 5 years ago or 3 years ago and put in way too much money. Right, so the function of a digital company, just like of GE, is finance. The app is the brand on the investment. The product is not the app. The product is the stock. And you just have to then come up with some innovation, some pivot that's going to convince a new round of investors to think that they're going to get 100x return on their investment by paying you 100x what you put in. Right? And what this all came from, and we don't have time to really go into it, what it all came from was a late medieval effort to prevent the rise of the last great peer-to-peer economy. Right after the Crusades, when all the soldiers came back to Western Europe from all these Moorish territories and different places they took over, when they came back, they brought back with them all these innovations from other places. One of those innovations was the bazaar, or what we called the marketplace. And the marketplace allowed former peasants to go to a central location twice a week, bring the stuff they had made, and trade it. And they also brought with them an innovation in currency, local currencies, market-based currencies. So because people didn't have florins, they couldn't get gold florins unless they were really Roman soldiers or something. They didn't have empire coin, but they had no way to trade their stuff other than barter. So they invented new kinds of money, like grain-based currency, where you would bring grain to the grain store and get a receipt on foil for the amount of grain that you brought, like 100 pounds, and you could perforate it and rip off certain pieces and use 10 pounds of grain to buy this and 10 pounds of grain to buy that. I bring it up because I know you're bank people, so you're interested in how money works. And this money actually lost money over time because some of the grain would be lost to spoilage or to rats. The grain store had to be paid. So if you have a money that's going to lose value over time, what's the bias of that money? Towards spending. You're going to spend that money, you're not going to hoard that money. So they intentionally created currencies. Some of them only lasted a day, some of them lasted weeks or months, but they intentionally created currencies that were optimized for the velocity of money to promote and prime the pump of exchange. And it was money that really couldn't be saved, it couldn't be hoarded because, like mana, it would go bad. So we had a huge rise of a middle class. That was the original bourgeois, the burghers, the original merchant middle class. And if you look at the data from that period, women in late medieval Europe were taller than they were at any time in European history until around 1980 in England. Because people were healthy, they were eating a lot, they were working 3 days a week, things were actually getting better. No, they didn't have iPhones and cars and stuff. It was the Middle Ages. They still got killed by axes and other Game of Thrones type stuff. But for the time, it was a growing peer-to-peer economy that the aristocracy wanted to repress. Because the aristocracy didn't know how to create or make value. The aristocracy hadn't worked in 1,000 years. So they came up with two things to repress the peer-to-peer economy. One was the chartered monopoly, or what we now call the corporation. Chartered monopoly says no one is allowed to do business in that industry except my friend Sandeep. No one else is. So you own shoes. That's your industry. You have a chartered monopoly. If you used to be a shoemaker, making shoes and bringing them to the market, now you have to be an employee of Sandeep. What's an employee? They didn't know what an employee was. They didn't have employees back then. This is when they invented employees. So now, instead of creating a shoe and selling the value you created, now you're going to work by the hour for Sandeep. That's the moment they put the clock on the tower in the middle of the medieval town, because now we started to understand time as money. That's when we invented what we now call employment or jobs. The second great innovation they came up with was central currency. Yes, central currencies had been used before, but never this intentionally and never as an interest-based, loaned-out monopoly currency. So what the king said, and King Philip is a great example in France, said, if anybody uses any other kind of money than mine, you'll be killed. Which is what they did. He sent out the Knights Templar to kill anybody using other money. Now you can borrow my money at interest if you want to trade anything. A great way for the rich to stay rich simply by having money. They lend out money so that people can transact, but the people who are transacting have to pay back more than they borrowed. If you have to pay back more than you borrowed, what does that mean about your economy? Economy has to grow. The economy has to grow really just to stay still. So the values that ended up embedded in the economy over the next 400 or 500 years were really the same two values that we're struggling with today. One, the economy has to grow. And two, now that we have non-competitive corporations or chartered monopolies running things, we make our value by extracting it rather than promoting exchange. Extraction of value. So think about like a company like Walmart. When Walmart goes to a town, it's not thinking, how can I develop a sustainable, healthy local economy that can continue to support my enterprise over many decades? No, what Walmart thinks is, do we have enough money that we can sell products at a loss long enough to put every local business out of business, so then we become the sole employer in a region, so now we can hire people part-time and not give them health care. That's what they're thinking, and it works for a time, but after 10 or 20 years, what happens? The region goes bankrupt. The Walmart closes and they move somewhere else. So that becomes the business model of extraction and growth. And we did it Just again and again and again. We did it through colonialism, then we did it through Bretton Woods and currency manipulation, and then we did it with technology and eyeball hours. And the problem with this model is not just that it makes the rich rich. The problem with this model is that it is essentially unsustainable. What's happened over the last 75 years, it's a great study called the Shift Index of 2011 that Deloitte did. What they found out was that over the last 75 years, corporate profit over corporate size has been decreasing. The corporate profit over size. It means corporations are great at getting big, but really bad at deploying the assets that they're sitting on. That's because their function is more like a vacuum cleaner. They're good at taking all the chips off the table, and then they see, oh my gosh, our market is bankrupt. There's nothing left. We've taken all the money, and we don't know how to deploy it. Right? Once they're sitting on all that money, what do they usually do? They do acquisitions as a substitute for genuine innovation and growth. Or we get to the digital age, and they do the same kind of monopolization and extraction, but they do it a whole lot faster. So Amazon can corner a market and establish a platform monopoly, or Uber can establish a monopoly in driving a whole lot faster. It takes them 2 years what it took a Walmart to do in 20, or a British East India Trading Company to do in 50 or 100. So what do? Oh no, there's no more growth, no more growth. We fold growth. We use digital technology to create abstracted, folded growth. We use algorithms and derivatives to try to create trading when there actually is no trading. Do you know the derivatives exchange got so much bigger than the real stock exchange that the New York Stock Exchange was purchased by its own derivatives exchange? Did you know that? The New York Stock Exchange was purchased by its own abstraction. And when there's no more money left, when everybody in a digital economy is too poor to actually pay for a service, what do? Don't worry, you don't have to pay. Just give us your data. Right? Oh, our data. Oh, data. Do you know data is the biggest bubble yet? It's bigger than a dot-com bubble. Every single startup I talk to says, well, I don't really make money, but don't worry, there's a whole lot of data. Our exit's going to be with our data, our data, our data. If every company's exit is data, and data is really just a subset of marketing, it really is, marketing and market research. And marketing and market research and advertising and branding as a total has never taken up more than 3% of any real economy. Because it can't, you need someone to actually pay for advertising. What's going to happen to all that data? Right, so what I'm arguing you guys should do, and I'm arguing it because I'm actually in a bank. So I want to argue to the bankers. And I know you're not the bankers, but you can affect the bankers. Instead of extracting value from people and places, right, program digital technology to circulate value. In other words, how do we optimize digital banking technologies for the velocity of money rather than the extraction of value and its conversion into capital? Right, the new role of banks is no longer monopoly funding of enterprise, but rather the facilitation of economic activity. Banks are no longer about growth, they are about flow. And flow is a way better thing to be selling because flow involves expertise. Your monopoly ability to provide capital is just a law. Your ability to promote flow is actually a skill. I mean, what, you're going to protect someone's money better than someone else is going to protect it? Everyone's walls are the same, everyone's encryption. It's like, that's not your skill. Right, so if that's your expertise, then what I'm asking, and I'll ask you to do 6 things with your technologies. 1, focus on making your customers rich. Most digital companies are focused on how do we take people's money away? How do you create value for people? It's more like a YouTube model where how do we cut in the people enough on the profit of their video that they'll keep making videos for us. Rather than make them starve while they make videos, we're going to lose the best video makers. 2, experiment with hybrid solutions. So one easy one would be, and you got to sell this to the individual banks, but do it as just, it's just a marketing experiment. It's a PR stunt, right? Just do them as PR stunts, and then when they work, let them be adopted by the company at large. Something like if Joe wants to expand his pizzeria to have a men's room and a women's room, and he needs $100,000. Normally the bank would give $100,000 to Joe based on his credit and then make him pay interest. What the bank should do instead is say, Joe, we'll give you $50,000 of what you need, contingent on your ability to raise $50,000 from your community using this app that we've created for that purpose. And of course, the underlying business model of the app is just someone gives $100 to Joe now in order to get $120 worth of pizza at the expanded restaurant when it's done. So now I'm getting 20% return on my money, and I'm investing in my own community. I'm increasing the value of my Wall Street, of my Main Street, which then increases my property value and makes my schools better. So I'm circulating my money. 3, develop technology as genuinely open source. And I talked about that before. It proves your centrality to fintech. If you have a moat, it means that you're not central to fintech, that you're off in your little, we're going to develop our little stuff here and then chuck it over there. You want to use it? As opposed to saying, here we are. This is where it's happening. Come play with us. 4, develop solutions for flow, meaning for a bounded economy. Think about, as a great example, what the Teamsters did in around 2008 after the last big crash. They didn't want to take their retirement funds and put it in the stock market and S&P funds because they didn't trust them. So what they did was they took their retirement funds and invested it in construction projects that hired steel workers. It was so novel, people thought it was illegal. Are we allowed to invest in something that's actually just going to pay us back the money that we just put in? And yeah, it turns out of course you're allowed to do that. So they got the money right back, and they got the investment. And then they went, well, now what if we invest in construction projects that not only hire steel workers, but build facilities for our own parents as they age, who they need retirement facilities. So they started to do that. So then they become the owners of the properties that they're making for their parents, and they're being paid to make. That's how bounded economics works, that kind of double dipping. It's better to earn, and you've got to tell businesses this, it's better to earn the same dollar 10 times than to earn $10 once. That's really the whole secret of flow. The same dollar 10 times, you still get $10 of revenue, but it's been moving. It's moving water, not stagnant water. 5, banks traditionally profit off debt and monopoly. Digital platforms let you thrive off abundance and distributed prosperity. It's a all boats rise phenomenon, yes, but it's not bad that everybody's getting wealthy. It's not bad for you. It doesn't make your wealth any less wealthy if other people are getting wealthy too. And banks have to understand that. And finally, the real goal, I would argue, of what you guys are doing, which is fintech, which is digital technology for the facilitation of economic activity, you want to move towards, I would think the goal, we'll never get there, it's a utopian goal, but the goal is a superfluid economy, right? The goal is that capital is everywhere it's needed instantaneously. So you stop thinking of money as this stuff that's stored on the hard drive, and you start thinking of it as this stuff that's in live RAM. And any money that's not in live RAM is not being appropriately distributed. It's not being appropriately used. It's just sitting there rotting. So the overall advice I would give you is that instead of optimizing people and businesses for the digital economy, use your expertise to optimize the digital economy for people and businesses. Okay, thanks a lot.
Amazing. So I want to.
You know, he used to be an independent guy. Then he got a job, and he's still nice, though. He didn't.
I want to ask you about debt as an instrument. And I'm going to give you 2 snapshots in history, and then want you to comment on where it's going. So, first snapshot, and this may not be proven, but a lot of people believe that money was actually invented as a way to handle debt. So, I gave you some corn when there was no corn in your house. Now we need a way to track that you owe me 5 ears of corn, or whatever, or a favor, or whatever it may be. So that's the first snapshot. The second is the innovation that led to what Capital One is today, which is in the 80s, you could not qualify for a credit card unless you had the creditworthiness of a $10,000 or $5,000 line. And along comes Rich Fairbank, and he says, no, we can actually offer a $500 limit, and then we can track with data and see if people are paying back or not, and then increase their limit and go from there. And there's obviously positives and negatives that came to society as a result. Now, I believe that debt is another way to keep money moving and flowing in societies. Just wondering where you see debt as an instrument going. What are some ways you've seen where it does circulate money?
Well, in terms of the invention of money story that you're using, I see that as why text was invented. You know, that's once we could write things down, then we could say, okay, I gave you this, so you're going to do something for me later or whatever. I mean, money was invented in a lot of different times in a lot of different places and for a lot of different reasons. You know, so when I look at history, I'm saying, oh, look what all these different monies in a multiple currency ecosystem of the late Middle Ages was replaced with blood, you know, by bloodshed to a monopoly currency system that's been so effective that most people don't even know that there's other kinds of money, that there could be, that we could have a free market of monies as well as, you know, they're almost there with like, oh, well, my airline points are kind of like a money. Like, yeah, you're getting there, but not quite. In terms of debt, there's no shame to debt. It's just you don't. Debt is a function of a properly moving economy. It's not something to be exploited. Just to say insurance is something we should provide for one another in solidarity rather than a need to be exploited by a corporation. Debt, you know, if you use a time dollar system, you know, these in most local currencies use time dollars. So the object of the game is you want to keep your account at zero. If you do work for someone else, you babysit at someone else's house, you might earn 3, 4, 5 hours of credit in your local currency, and now you want to spend that getting, oh, someone make pizza for me, or someone teach my kid algebra, or something like that. With those dollars, there's no point in accumulating a ton of things because the money is here to exchange. So being in debt, being sort of constantly in debt, is okay. It's different, though, than the way most of us are experiencing debt today in the larger economy.
And you mentioned crowdfunding as one instrument when you talked about Joe going out raising money. Are there any instruments you've seen, startups you've talked to in New York, where they are treating debt or the circulation of money in ways we haven't heard of or that are interesting to you?
I mean, there's a few places that are starting to look at other capitalization structures. I mean, so I go and I'm stumping like this, you know, on all different places. And so, okay, there have been a few positive reactions. Like Chobani decided to give 10% of their pre-IPO shares to their employees. That was the direct result of a suggestion in this book saying give 10% of your pre-IPO shares to your employees. So there's most of the places where the interesting stuff is happening are on the fringes, like in New Zealand, you'll see Lumio and Inspiral and these sort of alternative models. But there are companies, Winco is a worker-owned cooperative that's giving Walmart a real run for their money. And when I talk to Walmart shareholders, they're like, I don't understand it. How can Winco pay their workers more and give them shares and respect the local communities and still have the same low prices and have more profit than we do? And we do all these shitty things? Shouldn't we be able to make more money? And it's like, the reason you can't make more money is because you're taking 90% of your profits and delivering it to these shareholders who aren't doing anything. You know, if your shareholders are part of your community, then it works. So we're starting to see it, and it's really simpler. You don't need the philosophical background to implement circulatory strategies. You just need a bit of worker ownership or a bit of land understanding. Or, I mean, if you do read the Adam Smith and you do go way back to that, you'll see, what did Adam Smith say the factors of production are? Land, labor, and capital. In Silicon Valley right now, capital is the only one that has a seat at the table. Because in some ways, capital is abstracted, which makes it more consonant with digital technology. Capital can scale. People don't scale. Places don't scale. But what happens when people and places, when labor and land are not allowed at the table? Well, we get climate change because no one cares about the globe, and we get disenfranchisement of labor, which we're seeing in our political landscape.
That's excellent. Let's take some questions from the audience.
The comments about Twitter. I think, if anything, this most recent election cycle proved that Twitter is more relevant than it ever has been. I also, I hear this theory all the time about how Twitter is going to go down, because of the financial scenario that, its financial position right now that you described pretty well. But I also look at how, not just here in the US, but everywhere, all law enforcement departments use Twitter to get the word out. Schools use Twitter, colleges, high schools. It is there's no other platform like it today. There isn't really a platform quite like it. So it's implausible to me that it can go away. So what will happen to it? Something's got, I mean, it can't, the actual value of Twitter to people is increasing, if anything. How can you see such rising utility in a platform and then, you know, listen to this hogwash out there that says, oh, it's going to go away because of the finance. Something's got to happen to it.
You would think. I mean, when I'm going to a meeting next Friday, I'm doing a panel on can users buy Twitter from Twitter? You know, do it like the Cleveland Browns sort of model, where we create a user platform, user-owned platform, because we all get so much utility out of it. What if you took all the people, we all put $5 in? I mean, can we make enough? You know, can we raise enough capital to do that? I mean, yeah, Twitter or something like it will have to keep going, but there is a round of investors who will have to be eliminated one way or another. And we'll see. I mean, we'll see who's more powerful. If the investors are more powerful, they're going to keep pushing Twitter to try to do something more extractive, more money-making, and the quality of the service may start to diminish. You know, and they're probably going to, yeah, right now, Twitter's the best thing since sliced bread. But it's the wrong model for the economy I'm describing. It's helping people create and exchange value in tremendous ways. You know, it's a great paradox of the digital economy. You know, and it's looking for its Facebook pivot. How does it do that? And Facebook's pivot isn't even going to work, because Facebook's data is not worth what they think it is either. I think they've got a rude awakening ahead. But no, it doesn't mean they go away. You're right, it doesn't mean they go away, but it means that they're going to be considered financial failures. You know,
Well,
I don't think it's a Betamax thing. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, real quick. Yeah, I mean, as you guys know, the financial world doesn't understand blockchain. They think they only believe it's real if they can invest in it. Because they don't understand it's a utility through which we can authenticate transactions. So I love the blockchain. I feel sorry for Bitcoin people. I feel sorry for Ethereum people, which were well-meaning people doing the same pyramid scheme, but a pyramid scheme of integrity rather than a pyramid scheme of evil. It was sort of the same thing. The problem with banking is it's the same problem as with the fake open source. They're doing these closed little miniature blockchains. And they're saying, OK, we'll have these 12 computers will be allowed to participate in that blockchain. You know, when you go to a banking conference, those are not blockchains. You can't hire a for-profit little company to make your pseudo blockchain and think that that's blockchain. That's just an app.
Thank you so much. You guys can tweet at Douglas as long as Twitter exists still. So
you can tweet. You can email. I'm Rushkoff at rushkoff.com. You can email me. I'll send you a book. This is what it looks like.
He's not scared to tell you what he thinks, so you will get a response.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much,
Thanks
Douglas.
A lot.